I trained my replacement. Out of kindness, she tried to get me fired for creating a hostile work environment, so I brought 6 months of receipts to HR. I've worked at Hartwell Marketing Group for 8 years, starting as a wide-eyed account coordinator fresh out of college who didn't know the difference between a media kit and a media plan, and clawing my way up to senior account manager through nothing but stubbornness, late nights, and an almost pathological inability to say no when someone asked for help. I remember exactly what it felt like to be brand new and terrified. So over the years, I became the person new hires got handed to. Managers loved sending rookies my way because I was patient. I documented everything, and I never made anyone feel stupid for asking a question twice. It was, for a long time, something I was quietly proud of. That pride is what almost cost me my career, because it turns out that being the reliable one, the helpful one, the one who never complains, makes you a target for exactly the kind of person this story is about. A 24-year-old named Madison Cole. Madison was hired as an account coordinator, the same entry-level role I'd started in nearly a decade earlier, and my manager, Derek, asked me to be her unofficial mentor, show her the ropes, share my templates, walk her through our client systems, the same way senior people had once done for me. I said yes immediately because of course I did, and for the first week, Madison was a dream. She asked sharp questions, took notes on her phone constantly, and seemed genuinely hungry to learn. I handed over years of accumulated knowledge without hesitation. My report templates, my keyboard shortcuts, my color-coded client folders, the exact phrasing I used in status update emails so clients never felt ignored. I even sent her a doc I'd built years ago called Coordinator Survival Guide that walked through literally every recurring task in the role. I wanted her to succeed. I wanted her first year to be easier than mine had been. What I didn't clock, not for weeks, was that Madison wasn't actually learning any of it. She was collecting favors. It started small, the way these things always do. She'd ask me to proofread an email before sending it to a client, which felt normal. Mentors do that. Then it became, can you just clean up the formatting on this deck real quick, I'm slammed, which also felt normal, we're a team, right? Then it became her sliding half-finished reports into my inbox at 4:45 with a message like, I'm so sorry, I completely lost track of time. Could you just finish this last section? I have to run and pick up my roommate. And because I am, apparently, constitutionally incapable of watching a deadline blow up in front of me, I'd finish it. Within a month, Finish This Last Section had quietly evolved into her forwarding me entire assignments the day they were due with a message that always followed the same script. Some version of, you're just so much better at this than me, I don't want to embarrass myself in front of the client. I want to be honest about something here, because I've read enough of these stories to know how this sounds. I let it happen. Not because I was oblivious, but because every individual ask seemed small enough to just absorb, and I told myself I was being a good teammate, that this was temporary, that she'd get her footing soon and stop needing the safety net. 2 months in, I was effectively doing half of Madison's workload on top of my own, which at a place like Hartwell was already a lot. We run lean, and our account list per manager is not small. Madison, meanwhile, discovered she had a tremendous amount of free time. She'd wander the office chatting up other coordinators, take 90-minute lunches, and leave at 5 on the dot most days while I sat there finishing her client reports along with my own. Derek started praising her in our team stand-ups, saying things like, Madison's really hit the ground running, her Kessler account report last week was excellent, and I would just nod along, because saying, actually, I wrote that at 9:40 last night felt petty and small in the moment, and also, frankly, I still liked her. I didn't think she was malicious yet. I thought she was overwhelmed and I was helping. By month 4, the helping had metastasized into something that was genuinely wrecking my life outside of work. I have missed exactly 0 personal deadlines in 5 years at this company. I'm the person who submits expense reports the same day I incur them. I'm annoyingly organized, and suddenly I was missing things. I forgot my own cousin's baby shower because I was in the office until 8, finishing a competitive analysis that had Madison's name on the file header. I stopped going to my Tuesday night pottery class, the one thing I did purely for myself because I was routinely still at my desk when it started. My apartment, usually spotless, turned into a place I just slept in. I remember standing in my kitchen at 9:30 one night, eating cereal for dinner because I hadn't had time to grocery shop, and thinking very clearly this is not sustainable, and also somehow still not connecting that the solution was to simply stop. That's the part I still find almost embarrassing to admit. It took me 4 months to say the word no to a 24-year-old. What finally broke the spell wasn't some big dramatic blow-up. It was exhaustion, plain and simple. I hit a wall. One Thursday, Madison sent me a report at 4:50 with the usual, you're so much better at this than me line, and instead of opening it, I just sat there and looked at it for a full minute, and something in me went quiet and cold and clear. I wrote back, I can't take this on tonight. I have my own deadlines. The template I gave you in week 1 has the format for this exact report. You've got this. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften it with 3 exclamation points the way I normally would have. I just sent it and closed my laptop. And that, as it turns out, was the first domino. Over the next few weeks, I very deliberately, very quietly started giving things back. When Madison forwarded me an assignment, I forwarded it right back with a note pointing her to the resource that already covered it. When she asked me to just glance over an email, I told her I was underwater and she should send it as is or ask Derek for a second set of eyes. When she messaged me in a mild panic that she wasn't going to make a deadline, I told her calmly that she should loop in Derek and ask for an extension. That's what he was there for. I wasn't rude. I wasn't cold. I was, if anything, aggressively neutral, the professional equivalent of a brick wall with a pleasant expression painted on it, and Madison's reaction to this, watching it unfold week by week, was genuinely one of the more instructive things I've ever witnessed about how some people process being told no for the first time in their adult lives. Week 1, she laughed it off, assuming I was joking, sending back a, "Lol, okay, but for real though, can you look at this?" to which I just repeated myself. Week 2, the tone shifted. She got short with me in Slack, asked if she'd done something wrong, which I now recognize as an attempt to get me to apologize my way back into doing her work, a trick that had worked on me for 4 straight months. I told her nothing was wrong. I just needed to focus on my own accounts. Week 3 is when it stopped being between just the two of us. I started noticing the temperature in the office change, side glances from a couple of coordinators, a conversation that visibly stopped when I walked past the break room. A coworker I'm close with, a coordinator named Sam who sits 2 desks down from Madison, eventually pulled me aside and told me, somewhat uncomfortably, that Madison had been telling people I'd turned cold on her out of nowhere, that I was being difficult and unsupportive, that I used to be so nice and now I wouldn't help her with anything. I remember feeling this strange, dizzying mix of anger and self-doubt, wondering for about half a day if maybe I actually had been harsh, if I owed her some kind of explanation, before I reread my own Slack messages and realized every single one of them was calm, professional, and completely reasonable. Week 4, Madison filed a formal complaint with HR. I found out because Derek called me into his office on a Monday morning looking deeply uncomfortable and told me that HR needed to speak with me about a complaint regarding my conduct toward Madison, specifically that I was allegedly creating what she described in writing as a hostile and unwelcoming work environment for her as a new employee. I sat there for a second just absorbing the phrase. Hostile work environment. Words I associated with genuinely serious things. Discrimination, harassment, not declined to write her reports for her. Derek, to his credit, looked like a man who already suspected there was more to this than he was being told, but he had to follow process, and honestly, I understood that. I told him I welcomed the meeting. I meant it, because somewhere around week 2 of setting boundaries, some instinct in the back of my head, the same instinct that makes me color code folders and back up my hard drive obsessively, had started quietly building a paper trail. Every time Madison forwarded me an assignment, I kept the email. Every "you're so much better at this than me" message, screenshotted. Every late night I stayed finishing her reports, logged in a personal spreadsheet with dates, hours, and file names, a habit I'd started almost as self-therapy, a way of proving to myself I wasn't imagining the scope of what was happening. I didn't build this file to go to war with anyone. I built it because some part of me suspected, even before I could articulate why, that someone who offloads their work this compulsively and this early in their career eventually offloads blame the same way. Turns out that instinct was worth more than any performance review I've ever gotten. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon in the small conference room down by HR, the one with the frosted glass wall that everyone in the office calls the aquarium because you can see shapes moving inside but not details, which means the whole floor knew something was happening even if they didn't know what. I walked in and found Derek already seated, along with Patricia, our HR director, a woman I liked and respected, sharp, unemotional, the kind of person who takes complaints seriously, precisely because she doesn't let herself get swept up in anyone's narrative before she's seen the facts. Patricia opened by explaining in careful HR language that Madison had filed a complaint alleging that I had, quote, abruptly and without explanation withdrawn support and collaboration, become cold, dismissive, and unwilling to assist her as a new team member, creating an environment she described as isolating and hostile. I nodded along, said I understood the seriousness of that kind of allegation, and said I was ready to respond fully and would welcome Madison being present for that. A few minutes later, Madison walked in, and I want to be fair here. She did not look like someone bracing for a fight. She looked genuinely upset, eyes a little red, voice small when she spoke. She gave her account first, and it was, I'll admit, a masterclass in emotional framing. She talked about how excited and nervous she'd been starting the job, how I had seemed so kind and supportive at first. And then, she said, out of nowhere, everything changed. I started ignoring her messages, refusing to help her with even simple questions, making her feel like a burden, like she wasn't wanted on the team. She said it had affected her sleep, her confidence, that she'd cried in her car more than once. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes, and when Madison finished, she turned to me and asked if I wanted to respond. I said yes, and I asked if I could share my screen. I want to be clear that I didn't come into that room to destroy anyone. Even sitting there, I still had this lingering, almost dumb hope that maybe there was some explanation, some way this was a misunderstanding I could clear up gently. That hope did not survive the next 15 minutes. I opened my laptop, connected it to the room's display, and started with my email sent folder. I told them I'd pulled together documentation once I started noticing a pattern, and I walked through it methodically, without editorializing, just letting the dates speak. I showed 40 separate instances over 6 months of Madison forwarding assigned work to me, along with my completed replies, 40 being a number I hadn't even fully processed myself until I counted it out loud in that room and heard Patricia's pen stop moving. I pulled up the big one, a client presentation from 3 months prior that Madison had been praised for in front of the entire team, Derek visibly reacting as I said this, and showed the file's metadata, the created by field, the edit history, all of it under my account, along with a time-stamped email I'd sent Madison the night before that pitch with the subject line, "Here's the deck. Notes are in speaker view." Sent at 11:52 p.m. Then I opened my personal log, the hours spreadsheet, and showed the pattern of nights I'd stayed until 7 or 8, cross-referenced against the exact assignments that were due and under whose name they were submitted. The room went very quiet. Madison's face had gone pale, and she started talking fast, saying this was being taken out of context, that it wasn't unusual for a newer coordinator to get help from someone more senior, that she didn't understand why this was suddenly being treated like some kind of crime. Derek, for his part, looked like a man doing rapid math in his head, and I watched the exact moment he connected Madison's glowing performance review, the one he'd personally written praising her quick adaptation, to a set of files that weren't hers. He looked frankly embarrassed and a little sick. Patricia didn't say much in the moment beyond thanking me for the documentation and telling both of us the investigation was ongoing and she'd be following up, but I noticed she stopped taking notes on Madison's emotional account and started taking very precise notes on my 40 instance count and the metadata timestamps instead. That was the moment I understood the tone of the whole thing had flipped. HR didn't just take my word for it and close the case. To their credit, they actually investigated, which I appreciated more than I expected to. Over the following week, Patricia quietly pulled in a few other people. She talked to Sam, my coworker who sits near Madison, who confirmed, without me ever asking her to, that she'd regularly seen Madison come by my desk multiple times a day dropping off work, and that she'd noticed I was consistently the last car in the lot most nights while Madison left promptly at 5. Patricia also looped in Ronnie from IT, who pulled server logs and file metadata across a broader set of documents beyond the one deck I'd shown them, confirming that the digital fingerprints, the creation and edit history, on the majority of reports filed under Madison's name over that 6-month window traced back to my login. And then there was Deja, another account coordinator who'd started around the same time as Madison, who told Patricia, again unprompted, that Madison had tried the exact same routine with her early on, the "you're just better at this than me" line, the last-minute panicked forwards, and that Deja had simply declined from day one, told Madison no, and watched her never try it again with her, moving on instead to someone she'd correctly identified as more likely to say yes. Deja's read on it, relayed to me secondhand later, was blunt. Madison wasn't struggling. She was shopping for someone soft enough to exploit, and she'd found me. Somewhere in the middle of the investigation, Madison sent me an email. Subject line, "Hey, can we talk?" The body was a fairly stiff apology, something about how she felt things had gotten complicated, and she wanted to clear the air and hoped we could move forward as a team. I read it twice, recognized it immediately for what it was, an attempt to get ahead of whatever HR was about to conclude by manufacturing a friendly paper trail of her own, and instead of replying to her, I forwarded it directly to Patricia with a single line, "For your records." I never responded to Madison directly again. 8 days after that first meeting, I was called into a much bigger conversation. This time, not just Derek and Patricia, but the head of HR and, to my genuine surprise, the company president, a woman named Elaine Whitcomb, who I had maybe spoken to twice in 8 years, mostly at holiday parties. Madison was there too, sitting rigid in her chair, and I understood immediately that this was not a casual follow-up. This was a verdict. Patricia walked the room through a full timeline she'd built, an actual color-coded chart mapping 6 months of assignment handoffs against deadlines, cross-referenced with the IT metadata and witness statements from Sam and Deja, laid out with the kind of clinical thoroughness that made it impossible to argue with. Elaine let Patricia finish, then looked directly at Madison and said, in a tone that had absolutely no room in it for negotiation, that the original complaint alleging a hostile work environment had been fully investigated and found to be without merit, and that the evidence instead showed a pattern of what she called, and I remember this phrase precisely because it felt so satisfying to hear said out loud in a boardroom, performance misrepresentation coupled with a retaliatory false complaint filed after the misrepresentation was interrupted. Madison tried to say something about not realizing it was that serious, about how she'd just been overwhelmed and it wasn't meant maliciously, and Elaine cut her off, not unkindly, but firmly, and said that intent didn't change the fact that she'd built 6 months of performance credit on someone else's work, and then attempted to have that person disciplined for finally declining to continue. The outcome was laid out plainly. Madison would be placed on a 60-day performance improvement plan, under direct daily oversight from Derek, required to independently complete and submit her own assignments with no assistance, and if she failed to meet baseline expectations for her role by the end of that window, her employment would be terminated immediately. It was also noted formally in her personnel file that the original complaint had been found to be false and retaliatory, which at a company like ours is about as serious a mark as you can get short of outright termination. I sat there honestly, not feeling triumphant so much as tired, the way you feel after finally putting down something heavy you didn't realize you'd been carrying with your whole body. Watching Madison during her 60 days was, I'll admit, a strange experience, somewhere between vindicating and almost sad. Cut off from her safety net, she was genuinely lost. She struggled with the same templates I'd handed her on day one of her employment, the ones that, if she'd actually used them the way they were intended, would have made her job entirely manageable. Derek, now watching her far more closely, had to walk her through basic tasks step by step, things that should have been second nature 7 months into the role, the kind of hand-holding that honestly should have been happening from month 1 instead of being outsourced to me by default. 60 days came and went, and Madison hit the absolute floor of acceptable performance, enough that Derek and Patricia agreed to extend her PIP another 30 days, rather than terminate her outright, largely, I think, because the company wanted to be able to say they'd given her every reasonable chance. 2 weeks into that extension, Madison resigned. No dramatic exit, no final confrontation. She just quietly cleaned out her desk on a Wednesday afternoon while most of the office was in a client call, and by the time people noticed, she was gone. Her badge and laptop already returned to Patricia's office. Nobody threw her a goodbye lunch. As for me, the aftermath was, in the best possible way, almost anticlimactic. Derek personally revised my last performance review, the one that had been quietly dinged months earlier because my own account deliverables had slipped while I was buried under Madison's workload, and I got the bonus and raise that review should have reflected the first time around. Freed from doing 2 jobs, I threw myself back into my actual accounts, and within 2 months I closed out a major campaign for one of our biggest clients that earned a direct email from their VP praising our team specifically, quoting my work by name, which Derek forwarded to half the company. I sat in on interviews for Madison's eventual replacement, a woman named Avery Ross, and I watched her in that interview with a slightly different eye than I would have a year earlier, asking pointed questions about how she handled being new and out of her depth, listening carefully for the difference between someone who's nervous about learning and someone who's already planning who they'll offload the learning onto. Avery, it turns out, was the real thing. She took her own notes obsessively, asked me clarifying questions instead of asking me to just do things for her. And when she genuinely got stuck on something, she'd say exactly that. "I'm stuck. Can you point me toward the right process?" instead of quietly sliding the whole task into my inbox. 3 months after Madison left, Derek called me into his office again And this time it was to tell me I was being promoted to lead account manager, with a meaningful salary increase attached, a role that had honestly been sitting there unfilled for a while because nobody quite fit it until, apparently, they decided I did. The strangest part of this whole saga, the part I didn't see coming at all, is that my situation ended up changing policy company-wide. Patricia used an anonymized version of what happened, timeline chart and all, as a case study when she pitched leadership on building a more formal work attribution tracking system, something that logs file authorship and assignment ownership more transparently across teams, specifically so that a manager praising the wrong person for someone else's work becomes a lot harder to do by accident. She also overhauled how HR handles complaints alleging hostile behavior, building in a requirement to actively solicit documentation and third-party context before any formal action is taken against the accused, rather than moving straight to discipline based on a single account. I think about that sometimes, that my very small, very personal decision to finally say, I can't take this on tonight, ended up rippling out into an actual structural change at a company with several hundred employees, not because I did anything heroic, but because I got tired enough, one ordinary Thursday at 4:50, to stop being quiet about something I should have stopped being quiet about months earlier. I still think about the version of myself who spent 4 months absorbing someone else's job on top of her own, because saying no felt ruder than being exhausted, missing a cousin's baby shower, eating cereal for dinner, giving up the 1 hour a week that was just mine. I don't think the lesson here is some tidy little maxim about boundaries, even though it obviously is partly about that. I think the real lesson is narrower and a little uglier than that. Some people are not confused about what they're doing when they lean on someone's kindness. They're testing it, the way Deja tested Madison right back on day one and watched her fold immediately and move on to easier prey. Kindness that has no edges isn't a virtue, it's just an unlocked door. And eventually, someone walks through it who was never going to thank you for leaving it open. I don't regret training Madison. I don't even fully regret how long it took me to stop covering for her, because that whole slow, humiliating process is exactly what left me with 40 receipts, a metadata trail, and 2 witnesses who didn't even need to be asked twice to tell the truth. But I regret a little that it took losing a pottery class and a cousin's baby shower and half a year of 8 o'clock nights before I finally understood that being the reliable one and being the one who gets used are, terrifyingly, not opposites. Sometimes they're the exact same job description, just depending on who's writing the review.